Greetings again. We are now on to lesson 11C, third part of our block of lessons regarding the major and minor prophets. This one today is dealing with the life and call of Jeremiah, and again the notes that are provided here and the letters that are provided in outline form tie to the Ligonier outline that's part of the study guide available for each of these lessons. So as we look at this book of Jeremiah, we first see that the main call to Jeremiah was to be a prophet to the southern kingdom and announce God's impending judgment upon them at the hands of the Babylonian Empire. In this book, he was often nicknamed or named the Weeping Prophet, as he was very much emotionally invested in this people and struggled personally with the magnitude of the judgment that was coming, as well as the way that he was treated by the people in Israel. He was only 20 years old when he was called by God to be a prophet, and then served as a prophet to the southern kingdom and during the early years of exile in Babylon for a 50-year period of time. He was the last prophet sent to the nation of Israel in the south and was there during the final conquering by the Babylonian Empire and the exile taking away of the Israelites to the nation of Babylon. One of the things that's interesting about Jeremiah is that, much like Moses, he was a very reluctant servant at the initial call by God. He actually repeated very similar arguments, if you will, to God, that he was not of able tongue, nor did he possess the right leadership capabilities in order to do this kind of work on behalf of God. But in Jeremiah 1, verses 7 through 10, we see this poignant picture of God showing clearly to him that it will be God who will direct his tongue and his steps within this fallen nation. Next, we see that Jeremiah was very much like Isaiah, who was the prophet sent to the north near the early part of their attack by the Assyrians in the north. But the message was very much the same, in that there was judgment coming to the northern kingdom and destruction would occur to the people of Judah in the north. God was clearly messaging to them that he had to first pull this nation down, in essence to rebuke it for its past behavior, in order to then begin to rebuild it. In Jeremiah 7, verses 1 through 4, we see a very clear call by the prophet Jeremiah that they should be reforming their ways. And that message was particularly directed towards the priest and the worship leaders in the temple area, because they had begun to solely trust in the fact that they were in the place of worship, i.e. the temple, and not with the right heart for worship as God would require of them. Jeremiah's life as a prophet was not without its struggles, as we see clearly in the text. Chapter 20, verse 7 shows his direct struggles with God, and also is clear in the text that he daily suffered the laughter and the scorning of the people of Israel in the southern kingdom. Verse 9 of this chapter shows that he actually wanted to quit and was fed up with and worn out with the people. And again, remember, he served for almost 50 years. And so you can imagine how this would have worn on him to see how often he was warning them and how often they scorned him and disregarded his message, and then made jokes and laughed at him. Yet we see very quickly that the Word of God fueled him and drove his heartbeat and caused him to move ahead, even to the point of a few verses later in 13 and 14 of chapter 20, where we see his statements of praise and delivery for what God was doing in his own life. So chapter 23 of Jeremiah shows us actually a fairly clear assessment of the state of the heart and condition of the people of Israel. Verses 9 through 11 is a picture of how the false prophets within the kingdom, who were representing themselves as the spiritual leaders of the kingdom, hindered and opposed Jeremiah and his message. And in that, Jeremiah cried out to God for the cause that he had in delivering God's message, and actually had reached a point where he was crying out that God would step forward and destroy the nation as it existed there. And in verses 25 through 28, we see God responding that he will fulfill his promise of judgment, and that he calls Jeremiah to continue to preach to the people this message of judgment, and that restoration would be coming. We don't know exactly how far into the 50 years of ministry this is, but it feels to me individually like it's near the time of the final overthrow of the southern kingdom by Babylon prior to their exile. So we see the book of Jeremiah ending with this message of proclaiming the doom to come, and then as we see in verses 5 and 6, Jeremiah delivering the truth that there will be a coming Messiah, and that Messiah will later rescue the nations of Judah and Israel, therefore the 12 tribes of the Jewish nation. Jeremiah prophesies the coming judgment and the coming restoration that would occur after the exile of the people to Babylon. And then he prophetically told the people that they would see Jerusalem rising from the ashes. And we will see this in the last study that we have in this Old Testament survey, when we look at the two minor prophets, Ezra and Nehemiah, who are sent back after the exile to come into Jerusalem to rebuild both the temple and the wall protecting Jerusalem. So that's it for this particular study on Jeremiah, finishing our study 11 in these three parts, A, B, and C. And now we will move on to the last section, section 12. And I'll begin with a talk on the exile very briefly, and then move on to another prophet, the last of the major prophets that we're going to look at.